The penthouse overlooking Manhattan glittered with quiet luxury, its tall glass walls reflecting the endless lights of the city below. To an outsider, the place looked like the perfect setting for a high-level business meeting. Expensive furniture, polished marble floors, and the distant hum of traffic far beneath the skyline. But nothing about the gathering inside the room was ordinary. Around the massive conference table sat some of the most powerful and dangerous men in New York's underground world. They were businessmen on paper, investors in shipping companies, construction firms, and financial groups. Yet everyone in that room understood the truth behind those titles. They were part of an empire built in shadows. Armed guards stood silently near every entrance, their eyes constantly scanning the room. Every movement was watched, every word measured carefully. The atmosphere carried a quiet tension that only existed in places where power and violence lived side by side. At the head of the long table sat the man who controlled it all, Roman Vasilev. Even among criminals, his reputation was legendary. Over the past decade, Roman had quietly transformed the Vasilev organization into one of the most powerful criminal networks operating across several American cities. His empire stretched through shipping ports, financial institutions, and international trade routes that rarely appeared in public records. People in the underworld described him with a mixture of respect and fear. Roman Vasilev did not shout. He did not threaten loudly. He simply made decisions, and those decisions were final. The meeting that night had drawn some of the most influential figures connected to the organization. Investors discussed expanding operations into new markets. Logistics leaders reviewed transportation routes moving millions of dollars worth of goods across international borders. Every person at the table understood the importance of Roman's approval. Nothing happened inside the empire without it. Roman sat quietly while the discussion continued around him. His posture remained relaxed, his dark eyes moving slowly across the room as he listened. He spoke only occasionally, but whenever he did, the conversation immediately shifted in his direction. His authority required no explanation. Then something happened that no one in the room had planned for. The doors to the penthouse suddenly opened. Every head turned at once. A woman stepped inside. For a moment, confusion filled the room. No one outside Roman's inner circle was supposed to enter the meeting, especially not someone who clearly did not belong to the criminal world surrounding the table. Olivia Hayes walked forward before anyone could stop her. She moved with a determination that immediately caught everyone's attention. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, her expression calm but focused, as though she had spent a long time preparing for this moment. 2 security guards rushed toward her instantly, but Olivia had already crossed half the distance between the door and the conference table. The room erupted into quiet chaos. Several men stood from their chairs while others glanced toward Roman, waiting for instructions. Security moved quickly, blocking Olivia's path before she could reach the center of the room. Yet something about her presence slowed the reaction. She did not look frightened. She did not look reckless. She looked determined. Roman's eyes followed her carefully. For several seconds he said nothing. Olivia Hayes had spent most of her life learning how to stay calm under pressure. After their parents died years earlier, she had become the only stable support in her younger brother Daniel's life. She worked long hours to keep their small apartment, paid his school tuition, and protected him from the dangerous parts of the city whenever she could. Daniel had always been the one person she refused to give up on, which was exactly why she now stood inside a room filled with criminals. One of the guards demanded to know how she had entered the building. Another reached for the radio attached to his jacket, clearly preparing to remove her by force. Olivia ignored both of them. Her eyes focused directly on the man sitting at the head of the table, Roman Vasilev. The moment stretched across the room like a tightening wire. Roman leaned back slightly in his chair, studying the woman standing several feet away from a security team. There was no anger in his expression yet, only curiosity. Very few people ever managed to enter one of his private meetings. Even fewer walked in uninvited. Olivia spoke. Her voice carried across the silent room with surprising clarity. She demanded to know what Roman had done with her brother. The name Daniel Hayes meant nothing to most of the people sitting at the table. Several men exchanged confused glances, clearly unsure why the stranger had forced her way into the meeting. Roman's expression barely changed. He asked calmly why she believed he would know anything about her brother. Olivia stepped forward again, despite the guards blocking her path. The tension in the room grew instantly. She explained that Daniel had recently started working for a logistics company connected to Roman's shipping network. At first, the job appeared normal: warehouse coordination, shipment tracking, basic office work. Then Daniel had disappeared. His phone stopped working. His apartment was empty, and the last location data from his device pointed directly to one of the shipping facilities owned by Roman's organization. Olivia had spent days investigating the connection. Every path eventually led back to the same name: Roman Vasilev. The men seated around the table listened quietly now. The situation had shifted from annoyance to curiosity. Anyone brave enough to confront Roman directly was worth watching. Roman remained perfectly calm. He asked one of his advisors to check the name. A few seconds later, the advisor shook his head. No one in the organization had reported a Daniel Hayes working within the company's official records. To Roman, the explanation seemed simple. The woman had mistaken the situation. He told her that many companies operated under similar names and suggested she look elsewhere for answers. Olivia stared at him. For a moment, the room fell into heavy silence. She understood what Roman was doing. He was dismissing her. The calm tone in his voice suggested the conversation meant nothing to him. To a man who controlled an empire of money and influence, the disappearance of one unknown employee barely registered as important. But to Olivia Hayes, Daniel was everything. Her frustration built slowly as Roman turned his attention back toward the meeting discussion, clearly finished with the interruption. The guard began moving closer, preparing to escort her out of the room. Something inside Olivia finally broke. Fear had carried her through the door, but anger carried her forward. Before anyone could stop her, Olivia stepped around the nearest guard and closed the distance between herself and the head of the table. Several men rose from their chairs instantly, but she was already standing directly in front of Roman Vasilev. For the first time, his expression changed slightly. Not anger, interest. Olivia looked straight into his eyes. The room held its breath. Then her hand moved. The sharp sound of the slap echoed across the penthouse, like a gunshot. Olivia Hayes had just struck the most powerful Mafia boss in New York across the face. For several seconds, no one moved. The men sitting around the table stared in complete disbelief. Even the guard seemed frozen, because everyone in that room understood exactly what should happen next. Roman Vasilev had built his empire on power and reputation. No one insulted him publicly without consequences, and no one had ever physically struck him. Dozens of armed guards slowly reached for their weapons. Every eye in the room turned toward Roman, waiting, because the next decision he made would determine whether Olivia Hayes walked out of the penthouse alive. Most people who insult Roman Vasilev disappear before sunrise. That unspoken truth hung heavily in the air the moment Olivia Hayes' hand struck his face. The sharp sound of the slap still echoed faintly across the penthouse, bouncing off the tall glass walls overlooking Manhattan. For a few seconds, no one in the room seemed capable of breathing. The meeting had completely stopped. Men who had spent their lives around violence and crime now sat frozen in disbelief. Several powerful figures at the table slowly leaned back in their chairs, as if instinctively trying to distance themselves from the explosion they expected to follow. Because everyone present knew exactly what Roman Vasilev's reputation meant. The guards were the first to move. Within seconds, half a dozen armed men surrounded Olivia Hayes. The sudden movement of black suits and drawn weapons transformed the room into something far more dangerous than a business meeting. Hands reached toward holstered pistols. Others gripped the handles of concealed knives. One guard stepped directly behind Olivia, ready to force her to the ground if Roman gave the order. But the order did not come. Instead, Roman Vasilev remained seated. The faint red mark on his cheek slowly faded as he lifted his hand and gently brushed the spot where Olivia had struck him. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful, as though he were examining an unexpected puzzle rather than an act of open defiance. The silence stretched across the room. Everyone waited. Roman Vasilev had built an empire that ran through the criminal underworld of several American cities. His name carried weight in New York, Chicago, Boston, and even parts of Miami where his organization controlled shipping routes and financial networks. Over the years, people had learned an important lesson about Roman. He was not a man who forgave disrespect. Stories circulated quietly throughout the underworld about the consequences of crossing him. A former partner who had attempted to steal from the organization had vanished without explanation. A rival gang leader who publicly insulted Roman had been found days later abandoned in an empty warehouse. Roman never needed to announce punishment. The results spoke for themselves, which was why the tension in the room had become unbearable. Every person present knew the rules of Roman's empire. Disrespect was never tolerated, especially not in front of his own leadership circle. One of the guards placed a firm hand on Olivia's shoulder, preparing to force her down. The man's eyes remained locked on Roman, waiting for the slightest signal. Olivia felt the pressure of the guard's grip, but did not resist. She already understood the consequences of what she had done. The moment her hand struck Roman's face, she had accepted the possibility that she might not leave the penthouse alive. Her heart pounded violently inside her chest, but she forced herself to remain still. Fear had brought her to this room, but fear would not help her now. Across the table, several of Roman's advisors watched the scene carefully. Some of them appeared angry at the insult directed toward their leader. Others simply looked curious, studying the strange woman who had managed to create such chaos in the middle of a private meeting. One thing united all of them. They were waiting for Roman, because everything inside the Vasilev organization depended on his decisions. Roman slowly leaned forward in his chair. The small movement instantly tightened the tension in the room. Olivia could feel dozens of eyes fixed on her as Roman's gaze settled on her face. His dark eyes studied her carefully, searching for something deeper than anger or fear. For a long moment, he said nothing. That silence became more unsettling than any shouted threat, because Roman Vasilev was not a man who rushed his decisions. The reputation he carried had been built through patience and calculation. While other leaders ruled through impulsive violence, Roman preferred control. Every action served a purpose, and the woman standing in front of him had just done something no one else had dared attempt. Finally, Roman spoke. His voice remained calm and measured. He asked the guards to step back. The request shocked nearly everyone in the room. For a second, the guards hesitated, unsure if they had heard correctly. Then Roman repeated the instruction with slightly more emphasis. Slowly, the men surrounding Olivia lowered their weapons and stepped away. The sudden shift in the room's energy created a different kind of tension. Now the situation had become even more unpredictable. Roman Vasilev did not tolerate disrespect, yet he had just stopped his men from punishing the woman who had publicly struck him. The leaders seated around the table exchanged cautious glances. Something unusual was happening. Roman leaned back in his chair again, his attention still fixed on Olivia. Instead of anger, there was something else in his expression now. Interest. He had spent years surrounded by criminals, politicians, and businessmen who carefully measured every word spoken in his presence. Most people avoided even the smallest sign of disrespect. Yet the woman standing before him had ignored every rule. She had walked past his guards, interrupted his meeting, accused him of involvement in a disappearance, and struck him across the face. And she had done it without hesitation. Roman found that interesting. Courage was rare in the world he controlled. Recklessness was common, but courage was something different. Reckless people acted without understanding the consequences. Courageous people understood the danger and acted anyway. Olivia Hayes had clearly understood what she was risking. Roman studied her carefully, noticing the way she forced herself to stand upright despite the armed guards surrounding her. Her breathing was controlled, her expression tense but determined. She was afraid, but she had not broken. Roman slowly turned his attention toward the men seated at the conference table. The entire meeting had been thrown into chaos by the confrontation, yet none of them dared interrupt the moment unfolding in front of them. Then Roman looked back at Olivia. For the first time since she entered the room, he addressed her directly. He asked a simple question. Why? Why would someone walk into a room filled with dangerous men and strike the person who controlled them? The question carried genuine curiosity. Roman had seen many desperate people during his years building the Vasilev Empire. Some begged for help. Others tried to negotiate deals or escape punishment. But Olivia Hayes had chosen something different. She had chosen confrontation. The room remained silent as Roman waited for her answer. Several men in the room seemed almost disappointed that the expected violence had not yet occurred. Others leaned forward slightly, interested in hearing what kind of explanation could justify such a reckless act. Roman raised one hand slightly, signaling that no one else should interrupt. Then he looked at Olivia again. His voice remained calm, but his words carried a quiet weight. Anyone brave enough to slap Roman Vasilev in front of his entire leadership circle must have a reason worth hearing, and Roman had decided he wanted to know what that reason was. Olivia Hayes had not walked into a room full of armed criminals because she was reckless. She had walked in because someone she loved was already trapped in their world. The silence inside the penthouse stretched after Roman Vasilev's question. Dozens of powerful men watched the young woman standing in the center of the room, waiting to hear the explanation that had led her to challenge one of the most dangerous men in the city. Olivia knew this was the only chance she would get. If she failed to make Roman understand, everything she had risked would mean nothing. For a moment, her mind drifted back several years to a much smaller apartment on the west side of Manhattan. That was where everything had begun. Daniel Hayes had always been the kind of person who believed life would eventually improve. Even during the hardest years after their parents died, he carried a quiet optimism that Olivia sometimes envied. She had been 22 when the accident happened. Daniel had been 16. One moment their parents were driving home from a late dinner in Queens. The next moment a speeding truck had ended both of their lives on a rainy highway. The tragedy changed everything overnight. Olivia suddenly found herself responsible for raising her younger brother in a city that rarely offered second chances. College plans disappeared. The dreams she once cared about traveling or building a career faded quickly beneath the pressure of rent payments, medical bills, and the constant fear of losing the small apartment they shared. But Daniel had never complained. He studied hard in school, worked part-time jobs whenever he could, and tried his best to make Olivia proud. Even during the most difficult days, he remained the one person capable of making her laugh. Over time, their lives settled into a fragile but stable routine. Olivia worked long hours at a financial consulting firm in Midtown. The job paid just enough to keep them afloat while Daniel finished his education. Her plan had always been simple: support him long enough for him to build a future that did not involve the struggles she had faced. Daniel had always promised he would make that future happen. For years, everything moved exactly as planned. Then the job offer appeared. It came during Daniel's final year of college. A logistics company based near the Brooklyn shipping yards had offered him a position as a junior operations assistant. The pay was surprisingly good for someone with limited experience, and the work seemed straightforward: tracking cargo shipments, managing warehouse inventory, and helping coordinate transportation schedules. To Daniel, the opportunity looked like the perfect start to his career. To Olivia, something about it felt strange. The company itself seemed legitimate on paper. It operated several large warehouses along the East River and maintained contracts with international shipping partners. But the speed with which they hired Daniel raised questions. He had submitted his application only 2 days earlier. By the end of the week, they had already offered him a full-time position. Olivia remembered warning him to be careful, but Daniel had been excited about finally contributing to their shared future. For the first time in years, he believed he could help relieve the financial burden Olivia had carried for so long. So he accepted the job. At first, everything appeared normal. Daniel worked long hours learning the systems used to track international cargo shipments. He often came home late in the evening, tired but enthusiastic about the responsibilities he had been given. Yet over time, subtle changes began appearing. The company asked Daniel to sign several confidentiality agreements regarding certain shipments. Some cargo records were restricted to a small group of employees, and Daniel was told not to discuss them outside the office. At first, he treated the restrictions as part of working in a large international business. But the longer he worked there, the more unusual details began surfacing. Certain shipments arrived at the warehouse without standard documentation. Others were transferred between trucks in the middle of the night under strict supervision. Daniel noticed employees using private security escorts whenever those shipments moved through the facility. And then there were the names. Some of the companies connected to the cargo routes seemed strangely familiar. Daniel had seen their names mentioned in financial news reports connected to international investigations and corruption scandals. The realization made him uneasy. He mentioned some of these concerns to Olivia one evening over dinner. That conversation stayed in her mind long after it ended. The next week, Daniel disappeared. It began with a missed phone call, then several more. At first, Olivia assumed he was simply working late. But when midnight passed without any message from him, she began to worry. The following morning, she visited his workplace. The warehouse manager told her Daniel had not reported to work that day. His co-workers claimed they had last seen him leaving the facility the previous evening. No one knew where he had gone. Over the next 48 hours, Olivia contacted every hospital, police station, and friend Daniel had ever mentioned. No one had seen him. It was as if he had vanished from the city entirely. Fear slowly transformed into determination. If the police could not find answers, Olivia would. She began reviewing Daniel's personal records, searching through his laptop and phone messages for any clues about what might have happened. Most of the information appeared ordinary. Class schedules, work emails, reminders about upcoming bills. Then she found something unusual. Daniel had saved several files connected to the shipping company's internal records. Those files revealed the truth behind the business. The company Daniel worked for was not operating independently. It was part of a larger logistics network tied directly to the Vasilev organization. The discovery changed everything. Olivia spent the next several days investigating every connection she could find. Shipping routes led to companies associated with Roman Vasilev's empire. Financial transactions passed through accounts linked to businesses already suspected of organized crime activity. The deeper she looked, the clearer the pattern became. Daniel had unknowingly stepped into the operations of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country, and now he was missing. The realization filled Olivia with a cold certainty. Someone inside that empire knew what had happened to her brother. Every path eventually led to the same name, Roman Vasilev, which was why she had forced her way into the penthouse meeting that night. Standing in front of Roman now, Olivia explained everything. She described Daniel's job, the strange shipments, the documents he had discovered, and the sudden disappearance that followed. Her voice remained steady, but the emotion behind her words filled the room with quiet intensity. When she finished speaking, silence returned to the penthouse. Roman leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. The men seated around the conference table seemed equally intrigued by the story. Several exchanged thoughtful glances, as if considering information they had not previously known. Finally, Roman spoke. His expression remained calm, but the words he delivered changed everything Olivia believed about her brother. According to Roman Vasilev, Daniel Hayes had not been taken by force. He had chosen to become involved, because Daniel Hayes was already working inside a secret operation belonging to the Vasilev Empire. Olivia Hayes had entered the penthouse believing she was searching for one missing person. Instead, she had stepped into the center of a criminal empire far larger than she had imagined. The words Roman Vasilev had just spoken still echoed in her mind. According to him, Daniel Hayes had not been kidnapped or forced into the organization. He had chosen to become part of it. That possibility felt impossible for Olivia to accept. Daniel had always been careful, thoughtful, and determined to build an honest life. The idea that he would willingly involve himself in the operations of a criminal empire did not match the person she knew. Yet Roman did not appear to be lying. He leaned back in his chair, studying Olivia with quiet interest as the men around the table absorbed the implications of the story she had just told. For several moments, no one spoke. Then Roman slowly shifted his attention to the group seated around him. The interruption had transformed the meeting entirely. What had begun as a discussion about expansion plans had now become something far more personal. A missing employee connected to a secret operation inside the organization was not a minor issue. It suggested something much deeper. Roman began explaining the structure of the Vasilev organization, speaking in the calm, measured tone of someone describing a complex business model rather than a criminal network. The empire he controlled was built on 3 pillars: shipping, finance, and underground trade. Each branch operated through legitimate companies that masked the true scale of their operations. Cargo moved through major ports along the East Coast under the supervision of logistics firms registered as international shipping businesses. Financial transactions flowed through investment groups that handled millions of dollars every day. From the outside, everything appeared completely legal. But beneath the surface, the network allowed the Vasilev organization to move goods, money, and influence across borders without attracting attention. The empire stretched far beyond New York. Operations in Chicago handled large cargo shipments arriving from Europe. Boston managed several financial exchanges tied to offshore accounts. Miami served as a gateway for international routes moving through South America and the Caribbean. Each location functioned like a piece of a larger machine, and Roman Vasilev controlled the machine. Olivia listened carefully as he described the structure. The scale of the organization was far greater than anything she had imagined while searching for Daniel. What she had initially believed was a single shipping company was actually one small part of a vast international network. The realization made Daniel's disappearance even more troubling. If he had truly become involved in something inside this empire, the situation was far more dangerous than she originally believed. Roman continued speaking, introducing several of the key figures sitting around a conference table. To Olivia, they had first appeared like ordinary businessmen. Now their true roles became clear. Viktor Karpov, seated near the far end of the table, oversaw the financial operations that allowed millions of dollars to move through international accounts without raising suspicion. Luca Marconi controlled the shipping routes that connected warehouses across the eastern seaboard. His department coordinated thousands of cargo transfers every month. Another man, Gregory Levin, managed internal security for the organization. His teams monitored threats from rival groups and ensured that sensitive operations remained protected. Each person at the table controlled a critical piece of the empire. Yet, something about the situation surrounding Daniel Hayes did not fit neatly into that structure. Roman's attention slowly returned to Olivia. He asked several questions about Daniel's job inside the warehouse facility. Olivia described everything she knew: the shipment arriving late at night, the unusual security surrounding certain cargo containers, and the confidential documents Daniel had mentioned before he disappeared. As she spoke, Roman's expression changed slightly. At first, he had assumed Daniel Hayes was simply another employee who had volunteered for a project inside the logistics network. But the details Olivia described suggested something different, something more secretive. Roman turned toward Luca Marconi. He asked whether the Brooklyn warehouse had been involved in any restricted operations recently. Luca hesitated before answering. He confirmed that several shipments had moved through the facility under special authorization during the past month. Those shipments had been part of a classified logistics project connected to international partners. But according to the official reports, all personnel assigned to the project had been approved directly by Roman himself. Daniel Hayes was not listed among them. The room grew quiet again. Roman's eyes narrowed slightly as he processed the information. Inside the Vasilev organization, project of that level required strict oversight. Every employee working on sensitive operations needed approval from multiple levels of leadership. No one joined such missions accidentally, which meant one of two things had happened. Either Daniel Hayes had falsified his way into the project without authorization, or someone inside the organization had placed him there deliberately. Roman asked Gregory Levin to confirm the personnel records. Gregory accessed a secure tablet connected to the internal system. After reviewing the files for several moments, he shook his head slowly. There was no official record of Daniel Hayes being assigned to the restricted project, but there was something else. The security logs showed that Daniel had accessed several shipment records connected to the operation shortly before his disappearance. That detail changed the entire situation. The project itself had been designed to move high-value cargo through the network without drawing attention from authorities or rival organizations. Only a small number of trusted employees knew the full details of the operation. If Daniel Hayes had accessed those records, he had learned something important, something someone might want to keep secret. Roman leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more focused. He had built the Vasilev empire through careful control and loyalty. Every member of the organization understood the chain of command that governed their operations. If someone had recruited an outside employee into a restricted project without authorization, it meant that person had bypassed the entire system. And that was not simply a mistake. It was betrayal. Olivia watched the shift in Roman's demeanor with growing concern. The calm curiosity he had shown earlier was slowly transforming into something sharper. Strategic suspicion. For the first time since she entered the penthouse, Olivia realized something important. Roman Vasilev did not know everything happening inside his own empire. Someone within his organization had been operating without his approval. Roman turned his attention back to Olivia once more. His voice remained controlled, but his words carried new meaning. He acknowledged that her brother's disappearance might indeed be connected to the organization, but the circumstances suggested something far more complicated than she originally believed. Daniel Hayes had not simply joined the Vasilev Empire. He had been placed in the middle of a secret operation, and if Roman himself had not authorized that decision, then someone very close to him had. The realization settled heavily across the room. Several men at the table exchanged cautious glances, because they all understood what that possibility meant. If someone within Roman's inner circle had secretly recruited Daniel for a classified mission, it meant the Vasilev Empire was facing a problem far more dangerous than an angry sister searching for answers. It meant someone inside the organization had begun acting against the leader himself. Roman's eyes moved slowly across the table, studying the men who had helped him build the empire over the years. Then he spoke quietly. If Daniel Hayes had been recruited without his approval, there was only one explanation left. Someone within his inner circle had secretly placed the young man inside the operation for a reason Roman had not yet discovered. In the world Roman Vasilev controlled, enemies were rarely difficult to recognize. They operated openly, rival gangs, competing organizations, and foreign networks that constantly searched for opportunities to weaken his empire. Those threats were expected. Roman had built his reputation by confronting them with careful strategy and decisive force. But betrayal from within was something far more dangerous. Because when trust collapsed inside an empire, the damage could spread faster than any external attack. The moment Roman began considering the possibility that someone within his own organization had secretly recruited Daniel Hayes, the atmosphere inside the penthouse meeting shifted dramatically. The men seated around the table understood the seriousness of that suspicion. For years, the Vasilev Empire had operated under strict discipline. Every operation followed a chain of command that began and ended with Roman himself. Unauthorized actions inside the network were not simply mistakes. They were signs of disloyalty. Roman slowly rose from his chair. The movement alone commanded immediate attention. Conversation stopped instantly as the leader of the organization walked toward the large window overlooking Manhattan's skyline. For a long moment, he remained silent. The city light stretched endlessly beneath the glass, reflecting across the dark surface of the river below. Roman had spent years building the empire that now controlled many of those streets. Every shipment route, every financial exchange, every hidden partnership had been constructed with precision. And now someone inside that empire might be working against him. Roman turned back toward the table. His gaze moved carefully across each face in the room. If a betrayal existed, the person responsible might very well be sitting only a few feet away. The investigation began immediately. Roman ordered Gregory Levin to review every internal communication connected to the Brooklyn warehouse where Daniel Hayes had been working. Security logs, personnel assignments, financial authorizations. Every piece of information connected to the restricted project needed to be examined. Within minutes, multiple analysts inside the organization's headquarters were already searching through encrypted databases. The tension inside the penthouse continued to grow. Olivia Hayes remained standing near the center of the room, watching everything unfold with cautious attention. Only hours earlier, she had entered the building expecting a violent confrontation with a man she believed responsible for her brother's disappearance. Instead, she had become part of something much larger, a criminal empire investigating its own possible betrayal. Roman's attention briefly returned to Olivia. The fact that she had forced this investigation to begin was not lost on him. Most people would have been too frightened to confront the organization directly. Yet Olivia had done it without hesitation. That kind of determination rarely appeared among the people Roman dealt with, which was why he allowed her to remain in the room. The investigation continued through the night. Encrypted reports began arriving from different branches of the organization. Gregory Levin presented the first round of findings shortly after midnight. At first, the information appeared routine. Daniel Hayes had accessed several shipping manifests related to restricted cargo transfers. Those shipments had moved through the Brooklyn facility under a special authorization code belonging to a confidential project known only to a small number of senior members within the organization. But the authorization signature attached to the shipments did not belong to Roman, nor did it belong to Gregory Levin or Luca Marconi. Someone else had approved the operation. The discovery made the situation even more serious. Roman had always limited sensitive operations to a trusted circle of advisors. Only a handful of individuals possessed the authority required to initiate classified shipments, which meant the person responsible for Daniel's recruitment was almost certainly sitting at the same table. That realization forced Roman to reconsider every relationship inside the leadership circle. One name quickly rose to the surface: Marcus Cole. Marcus had served as one of Roman's most trusted strategic advisors for nearly 6 years. Originally hired to manage financial logistics for the organization's expansion into international markets, Marcus had gradually become responsible for overseeing several high-value operations. He was intelligent, disciplined, and known for maintaining strong relationships with powerful business partners across multiple cities. More importantly, Marcus possessed the exact authorization level required to approve restricted logistics projects. Roman turned toward the far end of the table where Marcus sat. The man appeared calm, his expression neutral, as he listened to the reports being presented. There was nothing unusual in his posture, nothing that immediately suggested guilt or deception. Yet Roman understood something important about betrayal. The most dangerous traitors rarely appeared nervous. They appeared confident. Olivia watched the exchange carefully. Although she did not fully understand the structure of the organization yet, she had spent years working in financial consulting. Patterns in business operations were something she recognized easily. As Gregory Levin continued presenting the shipment data, Olivia noticed something unusual. Several of the cargo transfers connected to the restricted project had been scheduled through alternate financial channels. Those channels did not follow the same routing patterns used by the rest of the Vasilev network. The funds had been moved through smaller intermediary companies before reaching the final destinations. At first glance, the arrangement appeared normal. But the more Olivia studied the data on Gregory's tablet, the more concerning the pattern became. Someone had intentionally hidden the true path of the money. Olivia pointed out the discrepancy. Her observation caught the attention of several men at the table. Roman stepped closer, studying the financial routing she had identified. She was correct. The transfers connected to Daniel Hayes' project had been redirected through multiple layers of shell companies before reaching their final accounts. That method was far more complicated than the organization normally required. It suggested someone was trying to conceal the operation from internal review systems. The discovery immediately raised the stakes. If someone inside the leadership circle had been hiding financial transactions from Roman himself, it meant the betrayal had been planned carefully. Roman returned to his seat, his expression becoming colder. Over the next hour, additional reports confirmed Olivia's observation. Several shipments tied to Marcus Cole's department had followed the same unusual financial routing pattern. At first, the differences had seemed minor, small adjustments in scheduling, slight variations in accounting documentation. But when viewed together, the pattern revealed something far more alarming. Someone had been quietly redirecting resources within the Vasilev Empire for months. Money, cargo, personnel, all moving through systems designed to avoid Roman's direct oversight. Marcus Cole remained silent as the evidence continued appearing on the screens around the room. But Roman could see the truth forming clearly now. This was not a mistake. It was preparation. Marcus had not simply organized a few unauthorized shipments. He had been building something behind the scenes, a separate network of operations hidden inside the empire itself. And that kind of network served only one purpose: power. Roman finally spoke again. His voice was calm, but every word carried unmistakable authority. He explained that the financial evidence suggested a long-term strategy rather than a single rogue project. Someone inside the organization had been quietly preparing the resources necessary to challenge his control. In other words, someone was planning a coup. The realization settled over the room like a storm. For years, Roman Vasilev had ruled the empire without serious internal opposition. Now, the first real threat to his power appeared to be coming from one of his closest allies. Roman's eyes moved slowly across the table before stopping once again on Marcus Cole, because the financial records now made one thing unmistakably clear. One of his most trusted advisors had been secretly preparing to overthrow him. In Roman Vasilev's world, trust was a rare and dangerous currency. For years, he had built his empire by relying only on people whose loyalty had been tested repeatedly through risk, pressure, and time. Every advisor sitting at his table had once proven their value through service to the organization, but the discovery of Marcus Cole's hidden operations had shattered that certainty. For the first time in many years, Roman realized that someone close to him had been quietly building power behind his back. And strangely enough, the only person in the room who had nothing to gain from deceiving him was the woman who had slapped him, Olivia Hayes. The situation had become too complicated for simple solutions. If Marcus Cole had been organizing a secret network inside the Vasilev Empire, then Daniel Hayes might have been placed in the middle of something far more dangerous than anyone had initially realized, which meant Daniel's disappearance could not be treated as a minor incident. It was a piece of a much larger conflict. Roman made a decision. Olivia Hayes would not leave the building, but she would not be treated as a prisoner either. Instead, she would remain under his protection while the investigation continued. The decision surprised nearly everyone in the room. Some of Roman's advisors looked uncomfortable with the idea of allowing an outsider to remain involved in such sensitive matters. Others appeared openly skeptical about trusting someone who had entered the penthouse as an enemy. But Roman understood something important about the situation. Olivia had no connection to the internal power struggle forming inside the organization. She was not loyal to Marcus Cole. She was not part of any hidden faction. Her only objective was finding her brother. That made her valuable. Roman instructed Gregory Levin to arrange a secure apartment inside one of the organization's properties. Olivia would remain there while the investigation progressed. Security teams would ensure her safety, and she would have access to the information necessary to continue searching for Daniel. The decision effectively transformed Olivia from an intruder into a reluctant ally. At first, the arrangement felt uneasy for both of them. Olivia understood she was now surrounded by people who operated outside the law. Every building she entered, every conversation she overheard, reminded her that the Vasilev Empire was built on power most ordinary citizens never witnessed. Yet, leaving was no longer an option. If Marcus Cole had truly recruited Daniel for a secret operation, then the answer she needed existed somewhere inside this empire. Over the following days, Olivia began working closely with Roman's internal investigation team. The partnership surprised many members of the organization. Unlike most outsiders who encountered the Vasilev network, Olivia did not react with fear or intimidation. Instead, she approached the investigation with careful logic, studying shipment records and financial patterns with the same analytical discipline she had once used in her consulting career. That ability quickly proved useful. Roman's advisors had been trained to monitor threats from rival criminal groups, but financial patterns were something Olivia understood differently. She noticed irregularities in shipping routes and transaction records that others had overlooked. Several shipments connected to Marcus Cole's department had been redirected through smaller warehouses that normally handled unrelated cargo. The locations appeared insignificant on the surface, but when Olivia mapped the routes together, they revealed something important. Marcus had been creating an independent logistics chain, a parallel network operating quietly inside the larger Vasilev infrastructure. Roman studied the pattern with growing interest. The discovery confirmed what he had begun suspecting. Marcus Cole had not been planning a single betrayal. He had been constructing an entire operational system that could function without Roman's oversight. That kind of preparation required time, resources, and secrecy. It also required people willing to follow Marcus rather than Roman. which meant the organization was already divided in ways Roman had not fully recognized. As the investigation continued, Roman began sharing more details about the structure of the empire with Olivia. For someone who had spent years studying human behavior inside complex financial systems, she understood something about Roman that many others overlooked. He was not simply a criminal leader. He was a strategist. Every operation inside the Vasilev Empire followed long-term calculations designed to maintain stability and control. Roman had built the organization by balancing different interests, business partnerships, political influence, and the loyalty of people who depended on the empire's protection. Marcus Cole's hidden network threatened that balance. If Marcus succeeded in breaking away with his own operations, it could fracture the entire organization. Olivia realized something else during those conversations. Roman Vasilev was far more intelligent than the violent reputation surrounding his name suggested. He listened carefully when Olivia pointed out financial patterns or strategic weaknesses in Marcus's network. Instead of dismissing her ideas, he considered them seriously. That mutual respect slowly began changing the dynamic between them. What started as confrontation inside a penthouse meeting gradually evolved into cautious cooperation. Neither of them trusted the other completely, but both understood that their goals had begun aligning. Roman needed to stop Marcus Cole before the betrayal destroyed his empire. Olivia needed to find Daniel before the conflict placed him in even greater danger. The investigation eventually led them to one specific discovery. Several shipments connected to Marcus's hidden network had passed through an industrial district near the Brooklyn waterfront. The warehouses in that area were rarely used by the official Vasilev logistics system. Yet Marcus's financial records showed repeated activity there over the past several weeks. Olivia studied the shipping manifests carefully. One of the facilities appeared repeatedly in the documents. The location was listed as a small freight processing center, but satellite images showed something unusual about the property. Unlike the surrounding warehouses, the building had recently undergone major renovations. Security cameras had been installed along the perimeter, and the parking area was large enough to accommodate multiple cargo trucks at once. It looked less like a shipping center and more like a controlled operations site. Roman's security team confirmed the suspicion. The facility was not registered under any of the companies normally connected to the Vasilev Empire. Instead, it belonged to a shell corporation created only 3 months earlier. Marcus Cole had been building something there. Olivia felt her pulse quicken as she studied the documents. If Marcus had secretly recruited Daniel for a project inside the hidden network, then this facility might be where that project was operating, which meant Daniel Hayes might still be alive somewhere inside that building. And Olivia had just discovered the place where he might be held. When power inside a Mafia empire begins to shift, violence becomes inevitable. The discovery of the hidden facility near the Brooklyn waterfront changed everything inside the Vasilev organization. What had begun as a quiet internal investigation was no longer a matter of suspicion. Now it was evidence. Roman Vasilev stood at the center of a situation that could tear apart the empire he had spent years building. The reports Olivia had uncovered confirmed that Marcus Cole had created an independent operational network inside the organization. Cargo shipments, financial transfers, and security resources had all been quietly redirected into a structure that did not answer to Roman, and the facility near the waterfront appeared to be its central hub. The implications were impossible to ignore. Marcus had not been preparing a simple betrayal. He had been building an alternative power base. Roman called for an immediate gathering of the senior leadership inside the organization. The meeting took place the following evening inside one of the secured offices used for high-level strategy sessions. Unlike the earlier penthouse gathering, this meeting carried a far heavier atmosphere. The men seated around the long table knew the situation had become serious. Several of them had already heard rumors that something was wrong inside the empire, but few understood the full extent of the conflict forming behind the scenes. Roman entered the room without speaking. He walked slowly to the head of the table and placed several printed documents in front of him. Shipping records, financial statements, and internal authorization logs. Every piece of evidence connected to Marcus Cole's hidden operations. For a long moment, Roman simply looked at the men around him. Many of them had helped him build the organization from its earliest days. Some had fought beside him during violent conflicts with rival groups. Others had managed the financial and logistical systems that allowed the empire to expand across multiple cities. These were not strangers. They were supposed to be allies. Roman finally began explaining the evidence. His voice remained calm, but the meaning behind his words carried enormous weight. He described the unauthorized shipments moving through the Brooklyn district, the hidden financial accounts connected to shell corporations, and the secret personnel assignments that bypassed the organization's chain of command. With every detail, the room grew quieter. Several men glanced toward Marcus Cole. Marcus had arrived at the meeting like any other advisor, his expression composed as he listened to Roman's explanation. Yet as the evidence continued to appear, the calm confidence he normally carried began to change. Roman ended the presentation with a single conclusion. Someone inside the leadership circle had been secretly building a rival structure capable of challenging his authority, and the evidence pointed directly to Marcus Cole. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the tension exploded. Several of Roman's loyal advisors stood immediately, demanding answers from Marcus. Others remained seated but shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, clearly uncertain how the confrontation would unfold. Marcus, however, did not appear frightened. Instead, he slowly leaned back in his chair and folded his hands across the table. For years he had operated as one of Roman's most trusted strategists. Many of the empire's most successful expansions had been designed under his supervision. His intelligence and discipline had earned him enormous respect within the organization. But now that respect was dissolving into suspicion. Roman watched him carefully. He knew Marcus well enough to recognize a change in his demeanor. The calm expression on Marcus's face did not belong to a man caught in a lie. It belonged to someone who had already prepared for this moment. Marcus finally spoke. His voice carried none of the defensiveness most people would show when confronted with betrayal. Instead, his tone was controlled, almost philosophical. He acknowledged the evidence Roman had presented, but he did not deny it. Instead, he explained that the Vasilev Empire had grown too large to remain under a single leader's control. According to Marcus, the organization had reached a point where its future required a different kind of leadership structure. Roman's rule had built the empire, but Marcus believed it was no longer enough to sustain it. The word shocked several of the men sitting at the table. To openly challenge Roman Vasilev's authority inside his own organization was something almost no one had ever dared attempt. Yet Marcus spoke with complete certainty. He explained that the hidden logistics network was not simply a betrayal. It was a contingency plan designed to protect the empire from stagnation and decline. In other words, Marcus had been preparing to replace Roman. The room erupted into chaos. Several of Roman's loyal supporters moved instantly toward Marcus, their anger barely contained. Others remained seated, watching the confrontation carefully as if weighing which side they should support, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The Vasilev Empire was now divided. Roman raised one hand, silencing the room. His eyes remained fixed on Marcus. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The tension between them felt like the center of a storm about to break. Finally, Roman gave the order that changed everything. Marcus Cole was no longer part of the organization. Security teams moved forward immediately, but Marcus had anticipated the reaction. Before anyone could reach him, the office doors burst open. Several armed men entered the room, weapons already raised. They were not part of Roman's security team. They belonged to Marcus. The betrayal was no longer hidden. It had become open war. The next few seconds erupted into violence. Shots echoed across the room as loyalists on both sides reacted instantly. Chairs overturned, glass shattered, and the once-controlled meeting space turned into a battlefield. Roman moved quickly, pulling one of his advisors out of line of fire as his own security forces rushed into the room from the hallway. Olivia Hayes, who had been observing the meeting from a secured side office, heard the gunfire almost immediately. Within seconds, the entire building was in chaos. Word spread rapidly across the Vasilev network that the leadership had fractured. Loyalists began choosing sides, while others attempted to secure control of different facilities across the city. The empire was splitting apart. Roman realized something else at the same time. If Marcus had launched his rebellion now, it meant the hidden facility near the Brooklyn waterfront was already operational. and Daniel Hayes was likely still inside it. Roman gathered the remaining loyal members of his security team and prepared for a direct operation. The objective was no longer simply rescuing Olivia's brother. It was dismantling Marcus Cole's entire network before the rebellion could spread further. The convoy of armored vehicles moved through the dark streets of Brooklyn less than an hour later. Inside one of the vehicles, Olivia watched the city lights pass through the windows, her thoughts focused entirely on Daniel. The battle inside the Vasilev Empire had already begun, but the most dangerous part was still waiting ahead. Because somewhere inside the hidden facility, the man responsible for the entire betrayal was preparing to reveal himself. Olivia Hayes had entered the Mafia world with only one goal. She wanted her brother back. But standing at the edge of the Brooklyn waterfront that night, surrounded by armed men and the quiet tension of an approaching battle, she realized something unsettling. Her choices had already begun reshaping an entire criminal empire. The convoy of black vehicles stopped several blocks away from the warehouse facility Marcus Cole had been using as the center of his hidden operations. The building stood at the edge of an industrial dockyard, surrounded by silent cargo containers and dim security lights that flickered against the cold water nearby. From the outside, the structure looked like any other shipping warehouse. But Roman Vasilev knew better. Inside that building was a man who had attempted to fracture his empire, and possibly the only person who knew what had truly happened to Daniel Hayes. Roman stepped out of the vehicle first. His presence alone seemed to steady the group of loyal men surrounding him. Despite the chaos spreading through the Vasilev organization, Roman remained exactly what he had always been: calm, controlled, dangerous. Olivia followed several steps behind, her eyes fixed on the building ahead. Every instinct inside her told her that Daniel was somewhere inside that warehouse. After weeks of fear and uncertainty, the possibility of finally finding him felt almost overwhelming. Roman raised his hand slightly, signaling his team to move into position. Security forces spread quietly around the perimeter, blocking every possible exit. Surveillance drones confirmed movement inside the building, multiple armed guards, and several vehicles parked near the rear loading area. Marcus Cole was still there, which meant the final confrontation was unavoidable. The warehouse doors opened moments later under Roman's command. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with the tension of men expecting violence. Marcus Cole stood near the center of the building, surrounded by several loyal followers who had chosen to support his rebellion. Bright overhead lights illuminated the cargo floor, revealing crates, computer equipment, and several secured storage units that appeared to contain sensitive materials. Marcus did not look surprised to see Roman. In fact, he looked almost relieved. The quiet standoff between them carried years of history. These were two men who had once built an empire together, now standing on opposite sides of its future. Roman walked forward slowly. His voice remained steady when he finally spoke. He gave Marcus one last opportunity to end the conflict peacefully. Marcus simply smiled. The rebellion he had started was already too far advanced for negotiation. Over the past several months, he had built alliances with rival organizations that had long waited for a chance to weaken Roman's control over the city's criminal networks. Marcus believed the empire Roman created was outdated. He intended to replace it with something new, something far more aggressive. But Roman understood something Marcus did not. Empires built only on ambition rarely survive their own instability. Roman stepped closer. For several seconds, the entire warehouse fell silent as the two leaders faced each other. Then Olivia noticed something that stopped her heart. Near the far side of the warehouse, behind a row of metal containers, a small group of men stood guarding someone tied to a chair. Daniel Hayes. He was alive. Relief flooded through Olivia instantly, but the situation remained dangerously fragile. Any sudden movement could trigger violence across the entire room. Marcus noticed Olivia's reaction and followed her gaze. For the first time since Roman arrived, his expression showed genuine amusement. Daniel Hayes, he explained, had been more useful than anyone realized. When Daniel first joined the shipping company, Marcus had quickly recognized his intelligence and curiosity. The young man had noticed irregularities in the cargo records far sooner than most employees would have. Instead of eliminating the risk, Marcus had decided to use it. Daniel had been unknowingly assisting with the development of Marcus's independent logistics network. His work helped refine shipment tracking systems that allowed Marcus to move cargo outside Roman supervision. But once Daniel realized the truth behind the operation, he became a liability, which was why he had been kept inside the warehouse. Roman listened carefully. The revelation confirmed everything the investigation had suggested. Marcus had been preparing this rebellion for months. Yet even now, Roman's expression remained controlled. He gave a final signal to his men. The confrontation exploded into action. Gunfire erupted across the warehouse as Roman's loyal security teams moved forward. Marcus's supporters returned fire instantly, turning the cargo floor into a battlefield of flashing weapons and shattered equipment. Olivia moved quickly toward the containers where Daniel was being held. The chaos around her blurred into noise as she focused only on reaching her brother. One of Roman's guards cleared the path ahead, while others pushed Marcus's forces back toward the loading docks. Within seconds, Olivia reached Daniel. His hands were tied, but his eyes were alert the moment he saw her. The reunion lasted only a moment before the guard cut the restraints, holding him to the chair. Meanwhile, Roman moved directly toward Marcus. The final confrontation between them unfolded in the center of the warehouse as the fighting around them slowly began to fade. Marcus attempted to reach one of the vehicles waiting near the exit, but Roman intercepted him before he could escape. The two men faced each other one last time. Marcus had expected Roman to kill him immediately, but Roman hesitated. For a brief moment, the possibility of revenge hung in the air. Yet Roman had always understood that leadership required something more complicated than vengeance. Destroying Marcus would satisfy anger, but allowing the conflict to end decisively would stabilize the empire. Roman lowered his weapon. Instead of executing Marcus himself, he ordered his men to take him into custody. The rebellion ended there. Without Marcus's leadership, the remaining loyalists quickly surrendered. The hidden logistics network collapsed within days as Roman's organization reclaimed control of the facilities and accounts Marcus had attempted to steal. For the first time since the conflict began, the Vasilev Empire stabilized. Outside the warehouse, the cold night air carried a strange sense of quiet resolution. Daniel Hayes stood beside Olivia, still trying to process everything that had happened. The criminal world he had accidentally entered had nearly destroyed both of their lives. Yet they had survived. Roman watched the siblings for a moment before turning toward the vehicles waiting nearby. His empire had survived the rebellion, but the experience had changed something important. Power, he realized, was not only built through fear. Sometimes it was shaped by the courage of people who refused to accept the rules imposed by men like him. Olivia Hayes had walked into his world and challenged it directly, and somehow she had helped save it. Hours later, as Olivia prepared to leave the city with her brother, Roman stood alone on a balcony overlooking the quiet skyline. The empire he controlled would continue, but he knew something had shifted, because somewhere in the city, the woman who once slapped him in front of his entire organization was now walking away. And Roman Vasilev understood one unsettling truth. She might be the only person capable of challenging him again.